Hi, I'm Ted Wolfe, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Welcome to the Implementors podcast presented by Guidewise, where we focus on the topic of implementation because ideas are easy and implementation is hard. Today, we have a fascinating guest, Dr. Jill Fain Lehman. Jill is a senior project scientist at the Human-Computer Interaction Institute of the Carnegie Mellon University. She's the author of a book, Private Eye, which I highly recommend and we'll talk a lot more about in this particular conversation. And I would also mention that we'll be exploring how leaders, business leaders, can drive meaningful change and understand the nature of AI. Welcome, Dr. Lehman.
Thanks, Ted. Great to be here.
Jill, it's a fascinating read. Highly recommend it. What led you to writing the book?
What led me to the book was seeing today coming. So a colleague, the third author, I have two other co-authors on the book. The third author, Paul Pangaro, and I are colleagues at Carnegie Mellon. We spent a lot of time in the 20-teens having conversations about what we saw coming from the precursors of things like ChatGPT. And we would talk, we would argue. He was a cybernetician. He has a long career in cybernetics. We would talk about AI. We would talk about what we agreed on and what we didn't agree on, but we both knew what was coming. And we used to just rant to each other. He tried to get me to rant more publicly, and I was reluctant to do that until he suggested the idea that we cast it as fiction and that we cast our arguments, our perceptions of what was coming, our reactions to those, and frankly, our perspective, our historical perspective, because we've been here before, and that we do that as a fictional story because what we really wanted to do was to connect to people who weren't in the field, who weren't going to see this coming. And when it dropped, we're going to be taken really by surprise and very much subject to whatever the story and approach of the day was going to be in the mass media. So COVID hit. He knew a young writer. Neither of us had any experience writing fiction. He knew a young writer who was willing to collaborate with us. That's Ashley Watson. And more importantly, was willing to do this as a, well, we call it cyber noir, as a sort of Maltese Falcon, dead bodies everywhere running around trying to figure out who did what to whom kind of thing. And so we were off. We were all on Zoom anyway. So the fact that we were in different places didn't matter. And interestingly, we were better at speculative fiction than we thought. And we finished the book and started looking around for an agent in October of 22. And ChatGPT dropped in November of 22. And pretty much everything we said in the book started to come true immediately, as opposed to the 20 years in the future where we said it. And we had a lot of discussions among ourselves about, given that everything was happening on Wednesday, as opposed to 20 years in the future, did we really want to rewrite the book? And we said no. We did make one substantive change and only one substantive change. And you will see on the copyright page that we added immediately a disclaimer that says the book was not written by an AI, nor was AI ever used in any portion of it. So, and we've just sort of watched things unfold from there. And I have, 500 bookmarks now for news stories in the popular press and the popular tech press that are stepping stones to what we describe. Either they are things we describe happening now, or stepping stones to what we describe as being 20 years in the future. Okay. And that's fun too, to map out.
So will there be a follow-on book?
Actually, yes, we are I would like to say we will release After Image in the beginning of the summer, but things slide.
Okay.
We all have full-time jobs. But yes, it's the first draft is one chapter shy of being done, and we will put it out to early readers sometime in the spring. And we hope to get it up up on Amazon, which is where you can find Private Eye, and After Image completes the story that started. So it really is a sequel. Hopefully it stands alone as a story. There's plenty of new bodies and so on, but it completes the relationship between Paloma, the young woman who is the human main character or protagonist in the book, and Marlo, who is the AI that has been her constant voice in her head for her life.
What is one important takeaway after reading the book that you would want readers to have?
I think the most important takeaway is that we are in a moment in time when we will have to, when we should begin to think hard about what is the relationship we as individuals, we as a society, we as a humanity, right, as a species, want to have. What is the relationship we want to have with AI? And what we are trying to do in this book and the sequel is to lay out a set of possible ways for humanity to interact with this technology, because this technology is quite different in important ways. So that, and to put those different ways of interacting it in very accessible, very familiar, almost trope-like, almost cliche kinds of experiences, so that people can immediately connect to them, and say, oh, is that what I would want? Would I want a relationship with a Marlowe? Would I rather have a relationship with another character I won't mention, and so on? And the takeaway really is it is not too early to start thinking about this, because while current AI is not sentient, it is not conscious, it is not even really doing the things that people are telling you with the language they're using. It's not reasoning, it's not thinking. The technology will continue to get better. And most importantly, the technology will, by design, appear more and more like what we expect from humans, and what has always, for the evolution of our species, signaled human interaction.
Yeah, there are so many things I want to unpack right now.
Okay, please do.
Okay. You had said earlier in the conversation that we've all been here before. It's kind of like a deja vu moment, if you will.
Yeah.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So I loved when people get all excited and start throwing around terms like thinking and sentience and consciousness. And I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, a scientist at Google named Lemoyne, who made headlines for a while because he was saying that the AI he was working with, Google's large language model, was showing signs of sentience and so on. I like to think back to the beginning of the field of AI, which most people would place in 1956. There was a conference at Dartmouth where the terminology was sort of coined. And pretty shortly thereafter, a guy who went on to win the Nobel Prize, Herb Simon, who was a researcher at Carnegie Mellon, he basically said, I give it 10, 15 years. I don't remember exactly what time period he said, but it was a very short time period. It's usually within a generation. So it's usually within 20 years. We'll have solved all the problems of general intelligence. We'll have computers that can do this. And there was an upswing in funding, and people got very excited. And then, lo and behold, in 1971, people turned around and said, you promised and you promised and you promised, and we don't think it's doing very much. And so everything crashed. And then a little later, people like Marvin Minsky, other big names in the field, started making the same kinds of predictions based on new paradigms, new problems they were solving. And again, things started to build. And then in the late 90s, early aughts, you have expert systems. And again, you have people going out and starting companies and throwing money at it and saying, this is it. We're going to have the singularity in 3 years, in 5 years. It's going to be right. And then we come down again. So there's this thing called the hype cycle. And I've lived through it a couple of times professionally. And that's what we're in now. And I know some people say, well, the hype cycle is already starting. No, the hype cycle hasn't crashed yet because it takes a while. And we will be here again. We will not ever, until we can't produce the energy to run computers, we are not going to stop trying to produce artificial intelligence, whatever we call it, AGI. There have been lots of different ways of referring to it. Whatever we want to call it, we're not going to stop trying to produce it. And we will keep coming back. And the predictions are always the same. You've got a set of people who say next year or 3 years. You've got the 5 to 10 year people, and then you've got the 20-year people. And I just think it's fascinating that it's always 20 years or under. And that is very much why we picked 2045 as the date, because we wanted to situate the story as being 20 years from now. And the idea that we will make progress again. There will be paradigm shifts. We will learn more because that's what science does. Mm-hmm. It gets better at doing things that it takes on as problems.
I'm sure you remember the 1999 thereabouts web collapse, companies saying they're going to make so much money, yep. Business plans written on napkins, funding was not hard, then all of a sudden it crashed. We're in I'll say, hype cycle now with AI.
Yes.
Do you think we're going to experience the same thing as 1999?
I think actually it's interesting. It will either be better or worse, and I don't know which one. But I can tell you why. Mm-hmm. In the expert systems craze, the bulk of the research itself was being done in academia. And yes, there were a set of companies that got spun out, but a lot of funding that was attracted, but there wasn't the amounts of money or percentages of GDP or expected return on investment was nowhere near what is now. So there's two sides of that, right? One side is they can't afford to fail. Mm-hmm. And so I think the hype will continue because some use cases will fall out. There's no question that the underpinnings of this paradigm shift afford us the possibility of doing some things we couldn't do before. Some of those things will be financially viable, and some of those things will be a really bad idea, either for financial reasons or for human reasons. So the fact that too big to fail is a thing might mean that we don't see it crash the way it did. On the other hand, the hype itself, the quality of what's being promised is so insanely over the top.
Over the top, good or bad?
Untrue.
Okay.
I'm just the choice of words. So this is a discussion I have whenever I go out into the community. I talk to non-technical people. I talk to students in computer science classes at local high school. And I always say the same thing. I wait until somebody brings up the question of hallucination, and I stop them. And I say, please don't use that word. And they look at me like, what is the big deal? And parenthetically, I thought I was pretty cool because I was using the lingo. And the problem with using a word like hallucination is it implies to those of us who are non-technical, to those of us who don't understand that it's hyperbole, it implies that that system is doing something different when it gives that output than when it gives the other output. The output that we say is thinking. The output that we say, is human-like or rational or whatever. But it's not. It's doing the same thing. It's not as if it's doing something. It's not as if it's doing something different. And incredibly important, because the more you buy into, language is my area, the more you buy into using the language they want you to use, the more you assume and build up in your own mind the beliefs that that's the right way to talk about it.
Mhm.
And it's not what the systems are doing. And so while the systems are doing some unbelievably great things that, as somebody who's worked in the field my whole career, love to see, it's not that. It's not thinking, and it's not hallucinating. It's just, using stats. And
Okay. Mhm.
it's a good effect for
Mhm.
things that we should be using stats for in some circumstances.
Mhm. So, there for a moment, I was ready to go out and sell my NVIDIA stock right away after listening to you, but now I think I'm going to take a deep breath and
I would
maybe
hang on to it because, as I said, too big to fail seems to be a thing.
right. Well, I think people will look at it also, and correct me if I'm wrong or you have a different viewpoint, but those who are using it probably are seeing, particularly with content creation and some of those things, significant improvements in productivity that they're actually finding through using it today. So it's not just theory. They're finding some use. The question is, how fast will the continuous improvement happen versus the leveling off, perhaps? Do you think?
Well, so leveling off is already happening. And in fact, the early claims were all big data this, big data that. That is already leveled off. What you can get out of those statistical realities have already leveled off. The new thing about thinking or reasoning, reasoning models, and I'm putting air quotes there for anyone who's only hearing this as a podcast. Reasoning is in air quotes there. It's just search. AI itself, artificial intelligence, is based on a computational model in which you don't know the answer, and you have to do a lot of processing to explore a space of possibilities, and you have feedback, and you have all kinds of other ways of measuring whether a particular path through that space looks better or worse. So that's what reasoning models are doing. It's just heuristic search, just the way AI has been doing heuristic search for a long time. It's how you do heuristic search in this new paradigm. All good, not going to solve the problem by itself. But what it will do is it will get better and better at what we call siloed applications. You talk about creativity, but what my reading suggests, and I read very widely because we're working on the sequel, and I don't want us to be, I have to keep speculating about the future based on what readers today know, is actually is not a great increase in productivity. What there is the ability to do boring, well understood, highly practiced tasks very easily and quickly.
Okay.
And that may have value, but it's unclear what is right now. It's unclear in which industries, in which application areas that will have enough value to offset the cost.
Okay. So now, excuse me, I'm having a little bit more of an impulse to maybe sell a little bit more of my NVIDIA, but I'm not totally there yet.
Not my goal. My goal is not to get you to divest.
I understand. What I'd like you to explain to me and the listeners, if you could, is you mentioned the word reasoning models and things like that. What is a large language model?
Okay, great. Yeah. So things like ChatGPT or Llama or any of the others start out as what are called LLMs, large language models. And what a large language model is a statistical representation of all of the language that the model has been trained on. So let me give you an idea, okay? In English, we have this terrible problem in language. It's called polysemy. We have words that have multiple meanings that are unrelated to each other. So if I tell you I robbed a bank, you immediately know which bank. And if I tell you I was fishing on the bank, you immediately know the other kind of bank. But if I tell you I saw a bank, how do you know which one I am talking about? You know because of the percentage of times you have encountered each of those two meanings that you know, given the context of our conversation to that point. So if you and I were previously talking about fishing in our conversation, then I can say, I took a picture of the bank or whatever my sentence was, or I sat on the bank or whatever it was. And all of that context tells you, oh, it's much more likely to be this. And if we have no prior experience together at all, it's still the case then that if we're both Americans and we live where most Americans live, we're probably talking about the place you put your money. Okay? That's a statistical phenomena. If I can capture that statistic, then I can figure out which of those meanings, and I'll come back to the word meaning in a minute, I can figure out which of those meanings is more likely, given the context of what I've read up to this far. Now, I use the word meaning because we don't have a good other word, but it's not really a meaning in these models. Because in a meaning with humans, meaning lives out there in the world, right? Mm-hmm. A bank is a thing we go to, and we both know that. And when I talk about a bank, I'm asking you to remember the thing in the world. These models don't connect to things in the world. They just connect to statistics. So for the model to get the meaning means that it decides, oh, the usage of bank as a building is more likely given everything I've seen before. And everything from now on, I will interpret as if that was the correct usage. Okay, I'll commit to that. And I'll use that to help me decide what the word blue means, or the word whatever, melon, or the word, right? Then it's not the fruit, it's melon bank. So that's all it is. That's what an LLM is. And you take all the language, all of the text that's out there, and you feed it through a particular algorithm, a particular statistical approach. And the thing that results from that approach is what we call a large language model. And then you can take that's your foundation, and you can do a bunch of things with it. But that's what the model is.
Okay. A couple of layman questions here. Large language model. Is it like a library? Does it have borders? Does it have a protective environment around it versus just going out into the universe in a mass and unorganized manner? Is it something that has some definition, walls around it or something like that, and you fill that up and that's the information it has, correct?
So very interesting way to talk about it. I think your intuition is exactly correct. Let me try to ground your intuition a little bit, and just please shut me up if I'm getting too technical.
Please.
So every large language model actually makes a commitment. And I'm going to use the word words here. There's a technical term for this, but it's not important for our conversation. Every language model makes a commitment to what the words are in the vocabulary. Think about what that means, okay? It doesn't learn new words. If a word lies outside of its vocabulary, everything else that is attached to or should be influenced by that new word, or by that unrecognized word, it can't do anything with. We know if we have a conversation with each other and I use a word like flabbergasted, and what you say to me, I don't know what that means, right? We have a way of negotiating meaning. This does not. And it has a fixed vocabulary. So your notion of a wall is actually very accurate in the sense that even though it can generate the next word in a sentence, given the context that has come before, based on probability, it can only do it from that vocabulary. And what that means is that it can generate an infinite number of sentences, but not all the sentences there are. So yes, it can express more than you or I will express in a lifetime if you just give it enough processing power and let it generate. I don't know if you're familiar with the infinite monkeys paradigm, but if you put a bunch of monkeys with typewriters in a room, right? If you give them infinite time, they can generate all the works of William Shakespeare. Well, they can generate everything, okay? So can these models, but they can only generate it out of the vocabulary they have. So that's one answer to your question. The other answer to your question is none of the applications that your listeners will be using that have large language models in them, things like ChatGPT, okay, are just the language models. They have a pipeline of processing where they try to do other things. And one of the things that these models, that things like ChatGPT try to do, one of the things that's behind the mirrors that you're seeing your reflection of when you use something that you're not allowed to look behind the mirrors in, one of the things they're doing is they are putting in what they call guardrails. There's code there that looks to make sure, or tries to make sure, that you don't talk about this, or you don't ask that, or it doesn't reply with this kind of thing. Because when you can generate anything next, and you aren't a human being who can look at what you're generating and decide whether that's against the law, somebody has to do that decision making for you, or something has to do that decision making for you. What those guardrails are, how they work, whether they work, how poorly or well they work, and under what circumstances, none of that is disclosed in the privately held models. Some of that is disclosed in the public models, in the open source models. But we are only now just beginning as a field to understand how to characterize it. So think of it as anecdotal, not scientific at this point.
Okay. So the walls of a LLM, all your information's inside of those walls. How easy is it to penetrate that wall?
Well, that's a really good question. I have yet to hear of any model that can't be hacked, any LLM that can't be hacked. And I will respond to this in terms of LLMs, but I would say that in general, the attack is really coming from other aspects of the pipeline, either the prompting structure, how do you prompt it? So getting in and actually changing the LLM is really hard. It's not impossible. And Anthropic, one of the companies that does open source, has published some papers about how you would go about doing that. So you can ask what the cybersecurity is for the data that is the LLM itself. But I think the bigger issue is most companies who want to use something like ChatGPT or one of these models as a resource are going to use prompting, and attacking the model through prompting, or getting in between the prompt and the model, is easy, right? If you have lousy security, if you're sending a prompt out, or I can get into your machine and change your prompt, then pushing the model into a portion of the space where you get back what I want you to get back that's very straightforward.
Okay. How do you feel about AI making decisions for a business? You're smiling.
Yep. So this is really, I think, gets to the core of why we wrote the book. I have for many years now, certainly since ChatGPT dropped and a bit before that, been trying to talk to people who are worried about AI, who are worried about the use of AI, and usually this came up prior to ChatGPT. This was coming up because AI algorithms were being used, slightly less powerful algorithms or a different kind of algorithm, but still AI, heuristic search-based algorithms, statistical algorithms, were being used in things like, should I make a loan? Should I rent to you? Should I do this? So all kinds of really impactful decisions about people's lives. And I think there was always a human being there, whether that human being was empowered to override the decision or not, was business, a business case decision or an economic decision or certainly should have been an ethical decision. But the questions themselves were behind the company walls. The problem now is that you can use something like GPT, anybody can use it. And so I think the real question, and the question that motivated us to write the book, is how do you decide whether you should be using that technology or not? How do you as a consumer decide whether to subject yourself to the use of that technology or not? And one of the main conceits of the novel is something we call the Machine Intelligence Self-Identification Act, which is a legal construct, that is a fiction in the book that occurs between today and 2045. And it occurs as a function of all the bad things that happen by not having an act like this, by taking the approach like GDPR or what's going on in this country, less, but still going on, at the state level at least, to try to think through every possible application, every possible circumstance, right? And this conceit, this literary conceit says, no, we should be thinking about this as if it were the Bill of Rights. And we should be willing to state right now that as human beings, we have the right to know whether we're talking to an AI or a person. And we have the right to refuse to talk to the AI. We have the right to refuse to get the information from an AI. And the reason for that is because if I don't know, and if you can convince me that there's a human there, we have all of human evolution setting us up, setting us humans up in that interaction to be manipulated, to be used, to be betrayed, to be taken advantage of, to be, yes, you could be helped, but you're not going to know. And when we talk as human beings, we have legal and societal, we have all kinds of protections in place. It will be the case that you will not be able to tell whether a thing is talking to you. And passing something like, we call it MISIDA, Machine Intelligence Self-Identification, MISIDA. So we call it the MISIDA Act. And I think it needs to be an articulated right. That's why it's in the book. But without that, I would say to you, because it isn't a law, and because frankly, there will also always be people who break the law. I admit that. My advice is this, and it's advice to you as a human being, not just you as a business owner, or to your audience as human beings, and not just as business owners. The metric I would apply, the general rule I would suggest is, ask yourself, if I were having this conversation with a person, would I need to trust the person to act on the response? And if the answer to that is yes, don't use AI. Don't ask your customers to interact with an AI if you want them, if you believe that they will feel the need to trust the response. If you are not willing to have them, if you don't believe in that response well enough for you to put trust on the line as a business person, you shouldn't be using AI. Because a person will have that interaction with the chatbot. And if that chatbot, even if you say this is a chatbot, and you don't say, if you don't want to talk to a chatbot, press this button, click this icon, I will get you to a person. Don't give me this choice, then I'm left having to trust it. And you're putting trust on the line.
So if I'm going to try to parse through a lot of ideas that you just expressed to me, and that would be, yes, AI can make a decision but that's not necessarily the right question to ask. The question to ask is, can you trust it? And that means, do you trust the authenticity and the ethics, the character behind it? And how do you know if it's quote unquote hallucinating or not and making up information? That's a matter of trust also.
Yes. And that's the most obvious aspect of trust, right? If it's just making stuff up, or if it's what it is giving you as a response is incorrect, right? But it is presenting it as correct. If that happens a large percentage of the time, that is not a trustworthy thing to interact with.
Right. So if I paraphrase the question, do you think AI can suggest versus making a decision? Is that more valid, do you think? Still goes back to the trust factor.
Yep.
The LLM, is it educated?
Yes. I think the language can hedge. And that is, from a human-computer interaction point of view, that is a different question. So now ask yourself, so I'm going to use customer support, because God knows that is an application area that's being sold. And that is, in fact, being touted as an economic win. But I have to use customer support a lot. I have a family member whose behalf I have to interact with a number of companies that are in the medical device industry. And I have to use that customer support a lot. And I will tell you that I have gone from talking to a human being who was knowledgeable about the product to talking to a human being who is not knowledgeable about the product, but is sitting in front of essentially a script that they must follow, and I must follow until they get to the bottom of it. I can't say to them, could you please pass me to somebody who's knowledgeable? That was 5 years ago. To now talking to a chatbot who not only is following a script, but more importantly, has no actual physical experience. That chatbot doesn't have diabetes. That chatbot doesn't know what high blood sugar is. That chatbot doesn't know what a stomach is, or what, right? So at least when somebody was following a script, if I said something like, the pod is not, the insulin delivery does not seem to be working. She has it on her stomach and it's here, right? That person knew what that meant. Okay. So think about that transition in customer service. Now think about it so I have two things to say. One is, think about it now from the company customer trust point of view, right? Is it worth what you're losing in frustration and trust and everything else? Is whatever economic gain, is that worth losing trust? And now I want you to think about exactly that progression with your doctor, with your therapist, with your, I don't know, pick
your vendor.
Pick what is now currently a human-to-human interaction that you depend on, that is intrinsically tied to the fact that that you are talking to a person, and that you can assume that that person has experience that is like your experience. Look, frankly, if I have a problem with a product that I use with my hands, I would like to be talking to something that has hands. I think that would be a good thing. I think that would be valuable.
Okay, so I have two things here. You can give an analytical description of making the decision and trust, but when you gave the example, the human example, it completely told the whole story.
Thank you. Yeah.
So what's the role of an agent then? Everybody's talking about agents
Everybody's talking about agents. So I love that everybody's talking about agents, because, of course, Marlowe is an agent. Marlowe is a very different agent than the kind of agents that are being built now. And part of the reason Marlowe is the way that Marlowe is, not the technical aspects, but the relationship with Paloma, is because Marlowe is a very particular take on that kind of split agency that people should think about. Is that the kind of split? So in particular, Marlowe is very limited in terms of autonomy. More importantly, Marlowe isn't an LLM. Marlowe isn't a model of all that is built from the language of a whole population spread out over time. Marlowe learns, grows, and is built in some sense as a model of Paloma in particular. So to the extent that Marlowe can think a little faster, look ahead, anticipate, explore a little bit further out than what Paloma can do, because she's the one who's embodied, she's the one who's acting in the world, Marlowe does so from Paloma's point of view, not from some uninterpretable point of view, not from some unexpected point of view. Marlowe is unlikely to do anything that Paloma wouldn't do. More importantly, Marlowe doesn't act in the world. Paloma acts in the world. Marlowe can say, watch out for that. Do this. Don't do that. I think this is what's going on. You've forgotten about this. Hey, look at this conversation again. I'll play it for you because it's important. But Paloma is the one that acts in the world. And so, in answering your question, agents are autonomous, right? You say your prompt is now go buy me my groceries. Go look in my refrigerator, figure out what I've got so I use it up, and then you know what I like, buy me some groceries. Okay? Sounds great, right? Until the agent decides to spend, $250 for a thing of caviar because you seem to like fish roe and it was out on an Amazon site, and so why not? Because you never said don't spend more than. And so what happens is you get into a loop where what do you trust the agent to do autonomously? And how laborious is it now going to be to get the agent to do exactly what you want when everything has to be spelled out? Is it actually going to turn out to be better for you? And under what circumstances? So think about Siri. Some of your audience, maybe you, I don't know, but some of your audience uses Google Home, Siri, whatever. The statistics show that in the days of 40,000 different applications that you could run, or 40,000 different skills, that was what they called them, that you could run on your device, turn on the lights, what's the weather, and call so-and-so. Why? Why is it that these devices that were hawked as being general purpose, you could get them to do anything, are uniformly used for a tiny subset of all of the things we can imagine hiring a person to go off and do for us if we had the money to hire a person, right? Why is that? It's because the problem isn't, can you do what's been stated? The problem is, do you understand what hasn't been stated, but which any other human being would already know?
So I'm sure I'm going to get some comments for what I'm going to say next, but it sounds like agents are kind of teenagers in training.
I'm not sure they're even teenagers. But yeah.
Okay.
In Japan, they would be more like 4 or 5-year-olds.
Okay.
Who are sent off to the store, and yes, you expect slowly over time. But even in that circumstance, they're sent down the street to the store to pick up one thing from somebody who knows who they are and knows who you are, and on the other end can help anticipate what they've forgotten.
Yeah.
Humans in the loop all the way, baby.
Okay. So before I get into some specific questions, I want to ask you about emotion. Emotion, AI, where's it going? What should we be aware of? What can it do and can't do?
So there's a really interesting, I can't remember. I wouldn't like to differentially plug anybody anyway, but I came across something and I just frankly can't remember the name of the company. But one of the things that the current models can do that this company is exploiting that I think is remarkable, a remarkable shift, is expressiveness, voice expressiveness. So read a written conversation between two people and being able to map in reading out loud or in the expressiveness of the voice. I mean, this is just not something that those of us who have worked in the field are used to have ever heard before at this level of perfection. And its downside is, again, if I don't know I'm talking to an AI, that AI just got a whole lot more convincing.
Yeah.
But its upside is, imagine, if you are visually impaired or blind, right? Imagine now having a voice that can read to you out loud and really capture, not in this not even original Siri kind of overly perky, no variation, but really emote. And I think that is a wonderful thing. I think that is a wonderful use of that technology. One of the things that has been at the forefront of AI for more than 10 years and predates things like large language models, but use that kind of underlying precursor technology, is the attribution of emotion. So there are models that will listen to your voice and say what the emotion is. These are being used in call centers and customer support to signal when a person is angry enough. And those of us who know about them get angry really quickly because I don't want to waste the call center person's. And by the way, I don't mean to denigrate the use of the job that the people who are doing, who are being paid and hired and sit in front of this and don't really understand the product. I'm not trying to denigrate them at all. I think that statistically, 80% of the calls they can handle properly, and that's great. The problem is what we call the long tail in statistics. That 20%, which I seem to always be in the long tail. So I know that there's something sitting behind there. The minute I can tell that I'm in one of these situations, I know that there's something sitting there listening to me and trying to decide, is she mad enough to put up the button that says transfer this person to a human being?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Most people don't know about it, and so it's still cost effective. The point at which we all start screaming from the get-go is the point at which you can't get a human being to sit there and take the abuse anymore. And everybody's going to want to get turfed, and then you either back off and provide a human being or you don't.
Right. So I'm a business person. Don't know a lot about technology. I hear about AI. I hear about great wins, increases in productivity. That's unbelievable. My friends tell me about it, how great productivity is and how they're really used to using it now 2-3 hours a day, et cetera, and great introduction to technology. How do I introduce, in your mind, AI technology to my business?
I think that you have to begin by understanding two fundamental truths. Unless your entire workforce is going to be AI and not humans, two things are true. One is that the most valuable employees in your business are the ones that have institutional memory. And the second is that there is more about work that is human constructed than the output of the business. The processes by which the thing gets sent out the door, whatever that thing is, the processes that make that happen, the thing that you are selling happen, those processes are mediated by human interactions.
Mhm.
And you can't just stick an AI in there, because what will happen is, yes, humans will adjust because the AI can't. And that adjustment will have ripple effects. And one of the most important ripple effects, it can be good, right? We all learned how to use calculators. It's really good if you can spread the math out. If your business allows you to just hand everybody a calculator and not have an accountant and then hire an external accounting service, maybe that's great. Okay. That can work, but it has to fit into, it's the right tool for the right job. And it's the right tool for the right job economically. It's the right tool for the right job in terms of human processes. And the most important thing for you to think about when you try to decide whether to use AI and how to use AI is the long-term effect of turning people who used to think about something hard into people who just check a box and say yes or no and didn't do the thinking. What is the loss of skill and institutional memory from the humans who are left not having come up through the ranks, through the human processes and the human thought that they used to? And that's going to play out, and it's going to be okay for some, and it's not going to be okay for others.
Okay, so it leads me to a question that I've been dying to ask, and now is the time to ask.
Okay.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Everybody's talking about it. It's a hot topic. Investing. A lot of money's being invested in it or talked about being invested in it from some very, very smart people, by the way.
Yes.
Okay. So do you think at this point in time, if I look at a business, I say I have a business goal and then I have business processes and workflow that people need to work through to get that goal and capture that goal? That human element, do you think AI, with its threat, quote unquote threat, of replacing humans in that process of workflow to get to the goal, will force individuals to become more emotionally intelligent, aware of the human element that is involved in production, showing up for work and being engaged, think proactively versus reactively, begin to build more of a, I'm going to say, self-awareness on, am I emotionally dominant or rationally dominant? Because I manage people if I'm emotionally dominant through emotion, and that can get me in trouble.
I would love to work at a place where that's true.
Please elaborate.
There's a reason we wrote this as noir. I'm not by nature necessarily rose-colored glasses kind of person. I think any major shift can be a shift, a positive shift or a negative shift. I think for every well thought out use of AI that will have exactly the effect you're talking about, there will be uses, and I know they're already happening, of AI that will have exactly the opposite effect. I think to have the effect that you're talking about means taking it slow. It doesn't mean firing everybody and trying to, and in fact, the people who did that, those companies don't exist anymore, right? It's taking it slow. It's finding, it's like in anything else. It's finding the people in your company who are the natural beta test users and saying, hey, try it for now. This isn't going to affect your compensation. This isn't going to affect your bonus. This is just go try it. You will have a faster learning curve than others. You like this. You like trying new things. Try this for a month. See where you think it works. See where you don't. Report back. Okay, you did that. Let's see. We've got 3 other people who are in a big enough company. Maybe we've got 1 other person, whatever. Who else do you think ought to, given where it succeeded and where you think it wasn't worth the effort, or you were doing all of the teaching, or all of the correcting because it just couldn't handle the task you were trying to give it? How do we spread it out a little further? Who's the next person, right? I mean, just don't expect overnight. Don't expect thinking and reasoning. Don't expect consciousness or singularity tomorrow. Look at it as a tool, an important, potentially important tool, but don't put it in a position of trust because you will be betraying your customers.
Okay. So this has been a fascinating conversation of which I have many more questions, and perhaps we can do a follow-up. But what does the future look like for you, Jill?
Personally? Well, we are working on the sequel to Private Eye, which has been a real experience in and of itself. As I mentioned, I think at the beginning, we wrote Private Eye before ChatGPT dropped, and then it dropped, and the world and our readership more particularly changed. So we have been working very hard to create a book, the sequel, to tie up the story of Paloma and Marlowe in a way that is true and consistent with Private Eye, but still seems like we're talking about 20 years from now and not last Wednesday.
Okay.
And that has been extremely challenging. I'm currently in the position of working with graduate students who are very much in a world where everything is LLMs and generative AI and the rest, and seeing their concerns and their desire for ethical uses, their exploration of how do we figure out what these models can in theory do and can't do, and most particularly the ones who are looking with a sort of historical eye, remembering all the other things that have happened in the field of AI and asking what's next? How do we combine this with the other things we know from this 50-year history? I hope to continue to do that at CMU for quite some time to come. I enjoy that very much. I've also spent a very large portion of my life in industry as a consultant, occasionally as a full-time employee, but mostly as a consultant. And I look forward to a time when my attitude is more appreciated, and people would like to engage in a more human-centered exploration of how to use human-centered and realistic exploration of how to use AI in their companies.
Okay. And if somebody would want to talk to you personally, what's the best way to contact you?
Probably there's really only two ways, so either one is good. I am on LinkedIn, and that's Jill Fain Lehman, and I am JFL, my initials, at cs.cmu.edu.
Okay. Very good. Jill, it's great talking with you. Interesting, fascinating conversation. Enjoyed it very much. I'd love to be able to follow up, perhaps talk again and continue, because I do have many, many more questions.
Happy to. Very happy to. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Hi, Ted Wolf here. I want to thank you for joining us for this Implementors video. The Implementors podcast is presented by Guidewise, where we, along with our vetted member community, recognize that ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. To learn more about getting things done with Guidewise, please visit us at guidewise.io. And to conquer your implementation struggles, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Happy implementing.